Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 103. Let me begin with dedicating this class to a dear friend, a colleague, Rabbi Yeshua ben Yamin Gordon, Olav Shalom, a extremely fine man, shliach of the Rebbe, built an empire of the Rebbe in the Valley in California, and I can say a personal friend of mine. We had met a number of times, but especially spent Pesach together a few times and really connected. And he saw me in some way as a mentor, and I saw him in a way as a mentor. We would consult with each other. And one of the most discreet people I've ever met, a real tsunua, humble, modest, and really dedicated to the cause. And whenever a soldier falls, it is a tragedy for the entire army. But the way we honor a fallen soldier is by intensifying our commitment to the battles that have to be fought. In this case, thank God, they're not bloody battles. They're battles against ignorance, apathy, assimilation, and of course, using Chassidus as our ultimate weapon, applied Chassidus to teach and to guide us in how to live the best possible lives and fulfilling the mission and calling we were given to by God through his shliach, the Rebbe. When I started MyLife, Chassidus Applied, I asked Rabbi Gordon, he was a very practical person, had a different way of looking at things than I did, which was very refreshing and helpful. So I asked him, I said, I'll have a lot of things on my plate, and considering doing this, what do you think? And without hesitation, he said, absolutely, do it. And his approach, of course, was the Rebbe's approach. You could fit it in without compromising anything else, because that was my question. Should I stop something else? Should I do this? And that was his immediate response. And he was a person on the ground, very practical, not quite the dreamer like I am, and I say that as a compliment to him, meaning abstract and unrealistic at times and thinking you can do things in 24 hours that really require 48 hours and so on. So he was definitely an inspirer of this program, and again I dedicate it to him and to his family. Should only know simchas, and we should all only know simchas and joy going forward, especially in this month of Adar, Shenichnas Adar Marben Besimcha, a double month of joy, 60 days, as the Rebbe explains. With that, let me go right into being that we're right smack in the middle of the contest, the MyLife Chassidus Applied contest. We have another, I would say, 10 days, probably more than 10 days, till a week from Thursday, so it's actually more, it's more like 12 days left till the deadline of February 24th, and I encourage you to write essays for the $10,000 first prize, $3,600 second prize, $1,000 third prize. But regardless, the mere fact that we're writing essays and are teaching and learning and applying Chassidus is in itself the greatest reward of all. And I feel honored to be part of such a revolutionary project that is really inspiring many and creating waves and buzz. And I encourage everyone to participate. meaningfullife.com. Go to meaningfullife.com/contest for all the details and guidelines and how to submit. This year, due to the success of last year's program, we've created many more judges, and will be special judges judging the Hebrew essays and of course those that come in English. We're all excited about it, and hopefully we'll surpass far beyond the numbers that came in last year, as they are streaming in as we speak. With that, let me just address that the essay contest with a few comments that I received and some questions, and of course a controversy that has erupted online and elsewhere regarding women judges. But first, let me read a comment that just came in. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I want to thank you for establishing the MyLife essay contest. Regardless of whether my essay places at all, I've already benefited tremendously. Researching and writing my essay gave me a whole new understanding and appreciation of Tanya. It inspired me to start sending out a daily Tanya lesson, a summary of the day's Tanya in layman's terms, with a practical takeaway. Baruch Hashem, there are almost 70 Jews from all walks of life subscribed, many of whom wouldn't be learning Tanya otherwise. This is all to your schus. Thank you again for all you do. I don't see it as my schus, I see it as the schus of all of us together Each of us plays our part, but this is extremely moving and very hopefully motivating and inspiring to everyone out there. Which leads me to the point that obviously we'd all like to be the number one winner, and it's a good prize. But remember, the actual work of having to apply yourself to write something that's explained to others, and I encourage everyone, show it to someone before you submit it, someone that can go through it and improve it, and make sure you follow all the guidelines. Just those tips, 2 tips alone, I guarantee you will get you a higher score. Last year, I mentioned this a number of times, but I don't want to reiterate, that the high scores were so close, it was literally a matter of fraction of points. I think the number 1 and number 2 winners were separated by like 89.9 and 89.7, or 89.8 even. The first top 30 were all within a point away of each other. So the guidelines are critical because it's the only way to be fair to everyone, that everyone sees the same guidelines, and if you just don't do one guideline, it unfortunately will diminish your score. So I strongly encourage that you follow those guidelines, and as well as show it to 1 person, 2 people, make it a project if necessary, to improve the paper, which is always a good thing to do. Evas Abikatus, the Rebbe would always insist that if anything was published should be shown to at least 2 people to look at. With that said, let's talk about a few questions that came in. Okay, so as we announced the first group of judges, and there will be many more prestigious judges across the board, to be able to cover all the essays, make everyone a fair chance. All the essays will be read blindly, meaning the judges will not know, not the name of the person, nor their gender, nor their age. Will be read purely on the merit of the paper itself, which just, again, creates a more equal playing field. Question arose about women judges. Why are women not qualified to be judges? To be very frank, women are very qualified to be judges, just as they're qualified to learn Chassidus, equally to men, in some ways even better than men. The Rebbe made it very clear that when it comes to Chassidus, as opposed to mitzvah shazman grama, which means mitzvahs that are not related to women, it's not for them to learn, because they might as well use their time for more direct and productive things that are connected to them. So when it comes to Chassidus, which deals with the 6 mitzvahs, as the Sefer HaChinuch in his introduction says, like the Sheish Arei Miklot, which are the 6 mitzvahs that are tmidies, constant, not bound to time. Faith in God, knowing God, Yedias Hashem, Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Avos Yisrael, mitzvahs of that nature, which is the essence of what Chassidus talks about, not the technicalities and the mechanics of any particular yontif or Shabbos or other type of dinim. This is equally responsible and equally mechuyev responsible for women to learn just as much as men. And a number of times the Rebbe mentioned that women in many ways can have a certain strength in Chassidus that men don't have. First of all, Bina Yeseda Nitna Be'isha, Yesum Be'isha, a woman has an additional measure of Bina, Mevin Dover, Meter Dover. Bina is the ability to expand, to extrapolate, to apply an idea. And women have more Bina than men. And in that sense, when it comes to learning Havana in Chassidus, which is Bina, Havana, understanding, comprehension, Bina in the context of developing and embellishing on an idea, women have extra strengths. An additional point the Rebbe makes is that Chassidus requires hergish, a feel. It's not just a maskol, it's not just a concept, it's not just an abstract theory. And women have a certain intuition, a certain feeling, sometimes better than men. Now again, this is not to knock men. Men have their strengths. But to point out that women have equal, if not more, appreciation and can apply. Last year, if I recall correctly, the top 11 contestants, the top 11 essayists that won, 6 out of the 11 were women, which demonstrates exactly this point. And so therefore, the question about women being involved, absolutely, as much as possible. As far as judges go, there's other factors involved, including tznius, including public display, including the fact that we live in a culture, there are guidelines of how we do things in a certain tzniusdik way, in a certain modest fashion. Without going into all the details, I think instead of turning this into a men-women thing, every woman should win. I don't mind if the women are first prize. To me, that's better than a woman being a judge, frankly. And though women are definitely worthy of being judges for halachic purposes and for hanaga purposes and minig Yisrael purposes, this is a more appropriate way. And if you want to have more details, ask your local rav what they think. And there's a reason that certain people are judges and there's certain people in different positions. Judge does not mean that someone is superior. Judge simply means that that's a role that certain people play. and more appropriate for them to play. If it was only women's contest, maybe we have a different way of approaching it and have the women be the judges. But here we want to give everyone that equal chance, and this is how we determined. So please don't see it reflecting in any way on women's understanding, appreciation, or even leadership role. The Rebbe makes it clear the role that women have as leaders in communities, as partners with their husbands, but all in the feminine fashion that's appropriate to women. Ask secure women who are Chassidic women whether they have a problem with their type of leadership role, and they don't have to have necessarily that type of headline that they're the judge, etc., etc. Enough said on this topic. There was another question. In terms of the essay, is it better to stick to the lesson from the text, or is it encouraged to add in your own ha'aris and interpretations of the Chassidus and how that applies to you? My answer would be a combination of both. It's better to stick to the lesson of the text. It's best is to be grounded in the lesson of the text, to make sure that you are grounded in the actual discourse, the mimer, the psyche, the letter, whatever it is that it is, because that shows that it's derived from there. Some of the essays last year, though they were excellent essays, were weak or weaker in the fact that it wasn't as grounded. They took an idea, but when you looked at the mimer, it was too generic, too general. It's always best to be able to see, this is the idea of the mimer, here's how I encapsulate it in your own language. All these are part of the guidelines that will add to your score, and here's how I apply it. So it should be a seamless flow from the source, well digested and well adapted, well expressed and encapsulated, and well applied. If you can create a seamless flow from the source through your explanation of the source, that actually captures, and even in a creative way, the ideas that were stated in the source, and then apply it, those are the three main things. Of course, application and relevance are a tremendous element as well. Another question that came in. I am writing this email on behalf of a few students who are hesitant about entering this contest. Being the rules allow for adults of any age, 15 and older I recall, to participate puts them at odds with a fighting chance to have an equal opportunity to win. Adults have more life experience and are more educated than they are. What's the best way to respond to them? Well, a few things. First of all, words that come from the heart enter the heart. This is true whether it's a 15-year-old or it's a 90-year-old. Yes, experience is experience, but this contest, this MyLife Chassidus Applied contest, is exactly that. It's not a contest on the level of experience people have. It's not a contest that a therapist will necessarily win over a person who doesn't have such psychological aptitude. It's a contest that a person takes an idea in Chassidus and applies it to their life. If a 15-year-old can do that and does it well, I see no reason why they can't win. Obviously, it has to be grounded in the source and so on. So what I would suggest to people who are younger, to make this a class project. Let teachers help, let families help, and so on. When do you start teaching? I mean, one of the big reasons we do MyLife Chassidus Applied in general, these programs, plus the contest, is because of the void that we're hearing time and again, and people can testify themselves to it. Many shluchim and others that say, we didn't learn Chassidus properly in yeshiva. When it comes to counseling someone, trying to give them advice based on Tanya, the Alter Rebbe said has all the eitzes, has all the advice necessary. I don't know how to do it. We weren't excited about Chassidus. Some will say, I know the ideas well. I can explain the tzimtzum well, but I can't bring it into a practical application. So when do we begin teaching people to do that? Not when you're 50 years old, 40 years old, 30 years old. We begin from young age. When do you teach someone how to swim? The younger the age, the better. Obviously, they're not going to be an excellent swimmer at age 2 or age 5. But you start teaching them then, by the time they come of age, they become excellent. The time to excite and motivate our young men and women is the youngest age possible. Obviously, there's a certain age which is applicable to write an essay. But we intentionally brought in that age because with the help of teachers, with creating that excitement, with creating the motivation that the prize offers, allows people to come in and of any age and apply themselves and bring out an idea. And yes, we should help them. Obviously, a 15, 16, 17-year-old should be assisted by people. Make it a class project. Give other incentives that make the kids want to be involved in it. And I think we also not have to think in terms of who's going to win. You run a marathon, there's going to be one winner of a marathon. However, everybody should be running in this marathon because that's how you exercise your muscles. That's how you learn how to do it. Then the next marathon, you'll be better. So I would not in any way start dumbing down people and say, you're not ready yet. When you're at what age will people be ready? At 18, at 19, at 20? Or what age exactly do we become experienced? You become experienced by doing it. The Rebbe encouraged young boys and young girls to go on Mivtzayim, to go and talk to people about putting on film for men, lighting candles. And we take that cue that this was for everyone. Even though, of course, you could say a young person, what could they say to an older person? But there's a tmimus, there's an innocence, there's a simplicity, there's a purity that people respond to. And the same is true with this contest. And I think we have to look at it in that broad sense of the word, and also teach them that, winning is not the only thing. Even though we have to try to win, there is definitely a goal and there's a prize and so on. But the objective here overall is the immersion in it, the excitement about it, the motivation. And as you get better, you'll be surprised. I will not be surprised if an 18-year-old wins. A 15-year-old can win with that help. Yes, of course, a 15-year-old, and the first time doing this, probably has not written an essay maybe in his life before or her life. However, with the assistance that I'm suggesting and making it a class project, a family project, bring brothers and sisters into it, discuss it, review it, I think this can try to be something that can literally excite that age. And imagine kids that age getting excited about Chassidus. You can imagine what that will lead to and what kind of fruits that would bear. Okay. We always go into the timely discussion of this week. The week is Parshat Tetzaveh. We'll read, and it's also the beginning of Chodesh Adar Rishon. So I want to just share, of course, Tetzaveh is the Maimer with Ata Tetzaveh, the Maimer of Tafshim Memal that the Rebbe distributed, and the last Maimer the Rebbe was Magia before Chav Zayin Adar, which talks, of course, about a Rebbe. Ata Tetzaveh, it's the only parsha in the Torah after Moshe was born where his name is not mentioned. It's only Va'ata Tetzaveh. Svarim say one of the reasons is because Moshe in that week, Tetzaveh Zayin Adar, which is the birthday and the Yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, is in the time of Parshat Tetzaveh, Zayin Adar. This year Zayin Adar Rishon, Zayin Adar Sheni, depending on how you count it. But on regular years, it's one Zayin Adar. And so it's a type of a siman and a remez of Moshe's passing, and Moshe's being so-called the void. So we don't say Moshe's name, we only say Va'ata, and you shall command the Jewish people, only with the ambiguous or the silent Ata. However, to say that something is said in the Torah just in a negative way, just to show that we can't mention his name, there's always a positive side. Another explanation given for this is also that Moshe said to the Eibishter, Mecheni no besifracha, when he was pleading for the Jewish people after they built the golden calf, that God should forgive them, and when God refused, he said, Mecheni no besifracha, erase my name from your sefer, which was one of the greatest, maybe the greatest act of Mesiras Nefesh. It wasn't just erase my name from any book. We're talking about Sefer HaChaim, Teiras Chaim, the life essence, Araisa v'kutsha brichu kul echad, Araisa Yisrael v'kutsha brichu kul echad, the essence connected to the Eibishter himself, that Moshe should say, erase me from this Torah, just like he shattered the luchas. We all know what it means to, God forbid, a Sefer Torah falls down by accident. It's considered a tragic day. And they fast and all kinds of tikkunim that are necessary to repair that. Here he took not just the Sefer Torah, the ultimate, the luchas themselves, that both carved and shaped by God, and took it and deliberately shattered them and said, erase my name from your book. So therefore there's a parsha that has a remez for Moshe Rabbeinu erasing the name. But that too begs the question, why would we want to remember such a negative thing? At the end of the day, God did forgive the people, and Moshe's name was not erased from the Torah. So why do we need to remember this by saying Va'ata, the so-called invisible Ata, that we don't see Moshe's name, we see something. It doesn't say Moshe's name directly. And the Rebbe explains based on the concept of Ata hareso ladas. Ata means Lashon Nechach, you. When you say Moshe, it's still at the end of the day a name, and a name describes some form of gilui, some form of expression of the individual. In this case, Moshe min hamayim mishisiu. Why was he called Moshe? Because he was drawn from water, which this explains he was drawn from Alma Diskasi, the hidden worlds of water. The Rebbe explains in a fascinating sikha, connected, of course, to the stroke, Gimel Shvat Tafshin Nun Beis, that that's why Moshe was kvad peh v'kvad loshen, difficult to speak, lo yish dvarim, a man of no words, aral sfasayim, pursed lips, or pursed, difficult to speak because he came from the world of machshava, the world of the sea. But that's a description of Moshe's level. When you want to say the etzem of someone, even a name is not enough. So you say Ata, you. You means all of you, beyond any form of expression, any form of manifestation. When we say that for the Eibishter, we have names, the 7 names that are not erased, with Yud Kei Vav Kei, of course, being the Shema Etzem. It's called the name, the essential name, the Shem HaMiyuchad, the unique name, the individual name, the Shem HaMeferish, the name that was explicitly stated by the Kohen Gadol and the Kodesh Kadoshim. But it's still a name. Comes the Zayir and says, Anoichi, when you say Anoichi, I, or Ata, in the context of you, it's Leisramas Lebeshum Eiz or Lebeshum Keitz. You're talking about the Eibush that has ears in the Etzem, more than Shema. Shema Etzem means, as Chassidus explains, Havaya is like Er Etzem, Etzem HaEr. It's reflecting, it's the essential reflection of the divine, or the essential reflection of the essence of the divine. But when you say Ata, you're saying that it's the divine itself, it's the essence itself. And where do you see that essence revealed? Often you don't see it when things are going well. When the Jews sinned, and they built a golden calf, and there was a challenge. That's when you saw the essence of Moshe revealed, where he said, you do something to them, erase my name from this book. Or break these tablets, because what value do I have if the Jewish people will no longer be here? There you see the Mesiras Nefesh and the Etzem of our Rebbe, the Etzem of his Pashto Dusas, the Moshe, the Choldara, the extension of Moshe in each generation, and Moshe himself. Never forget the famous Simchas Teda Tovshim Mem Zayin Sicha, where the Rebbe cried profusely about the last Rashi in Chumash, where it says, Yashakeicha Shesher Shivarta. It says, L'chola Eses v'amevsim asher osa Moshe le'enu kol Yisrael. The conclusion, in those moving words, written by Moshe's tears, according to one opinion, and saying that for all the aces, for all the signs and wonders that Moshe did before the Jewish people, and Rashi says, what is that? Shviras haluchas, that he broke the luchas. Of all things, that's what Rashi chose, the Rebbe asked. Moshe took the Jews out of Mitzrayim. He led them to the Kriyas Yamsuf, parting the sea, received the Torah through 40 years of the wilderness. There's nothing else but to find the great wonders and miracles of the ultimate is what? Breaking the tablets. And God says, thank you for breaking them. And with that, Rashi concludes a Torah that would have ended on a positive note. Here it seems like ending on a negative. Messiah and B'teiv. Without going into the whole Arichas, the Rebbe Simchas Torah rarely for such emotion, expression, and sadness. You could see he was talking about himself as a Rebbe. He said, yes, because this is the greatest feat of Moshe. The other things were all Gemaldika Giluyim, Medidika revelations, unbelievable. But you want to see the essence of Moshe Rabbeinu, you know where you see it when the Jews sinned. And what did he do? He put himself in the line. He deliberately broke the tablet, not as people think it was out of control, God forbid, out of rage. Because the tablets, as Rashi says in Kisisa, it was like the Ksuba, the marriage contract. The Jews had heard, they heard it, the Ten Commandments, do not have false gods. But they never received the contract. They never signed the bottom line, the dotted line. So therefore, in a sense, it wasn't consummated, the agreement. So their betrayal was a great betrayal, but it was not legal yet. So Moshe tore up the Ksuba, he broke the tablets, so you can come back to Hashem, says, you know what, they never received it from me. They only heard it. That's the Mesiras Nefesh. He was ready to give up not only his Elam Hazah, this material world, not only Elam Haba, spiritual world, but even his essential connection to God through the Torah. Erase my name. No, don't tell me to go build another nation. This is that single act of Mesiras Nefesh that a human being stood up to God, 80 days refused to take no for an answer, and that's why we have Yil's Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the year, when Moshe finally prevails. Salachti kidvarecha, as we say right after Kol Nidrei. I forgive you as you've said, God says. And Moshe prevails, comes down with the second luchas. Yem chasanos zeh matan Torah, the ultimate union with the second tablets. And this is how the Torah ends, on that high note. So Va'ata Tetzaveh reminds us, not about the negative, reminds us about the etzem of Moshe, the atzmus of Moshe, connecting to the atzmus of Muhus Ein Sof, to extract only that which can come from atzmus, which is total forgiveness for such a grave sin. Going right back to the source, right back to the engine room, so to speak, to the source of it all, and insisting and prevailing, giving us the birth of hope. The lessons in this are tremendous, especially in the context of applied Chassidus, V'ata Tetzaveh, and afterwards says, Kosis Lamoyer, as the Rebbe emphasizes in that Maimer and MyLife, Kosis Lamoyer, which means Kosis is when it's pressured, when there's oppression, when there's pain, and there's a fakfetched. even when there's situations that seem to be hopeless. Nevertheless, the va'ata, the etzem, gets revealed specifically then. And that's a tremendous lesson in life in general when we're dealing with challenges. Sometimes when we think it's all lost or seems all hopeless, to know there's no such thing as hopeless. The etzem is always there. Obviously, we want to reveal it. So va'ata should come out to be Moshe, and it should come out in a gili, a revealed way, that we can all benefit from it. So with that, let us move into, of course, talking about applied Chassidus, into some specific questions. And just to address something, we have all beautiful characteristics, as well as some that are not so nice. One of the main objectives of Chassidus is to change the nature of one's attributes, and even the very nature of one's actual character. L'shanis teva midesav, and even more, l'shanis midis hativim, as the Rebbe cites from the Likutei Diburim, in the beginning of Kuntas and Yonah Teres Chassidus. So that's one of the main objectives of Chassidus. As such, MyLife Chassidus Applied has addressed and continues to address how Chassidus helps us refine our characters, both in bringing out the best in us and also dealing with our less pleasant personalities like arrogance, anger, despondence, envy, judgmentalism, indolence, apathy, and self-indulgence, just to name a few. This week, I'm going to address a few more so-called ugly features, and based on a few questions that have been coming in, and one of them is called the Nisht farginen syndrome. In Yiddish, the word Nisht farginen is an expression which loosely means to not afford someone the pleasure of their success. Fargin means you afford them that pleasure. Nisht fargin means not afford them. It's a variation of what is called in English, or based on the German word schadenfreude, a sadistic condition in which a person derives pleasure from the pain or misfortune of others. So why would someone be troubled by the achievements of another? Especially if the person, the Nisht farginen, did not lose anything in the process. It's called in Torah, Chassidus talks about it, zenen v'zelech. Someone else benefits, and you could not have benefit. You lose nothing. Why not fargin? Why not afford them the pleasure? Why even gloat in someone's misfortune? We know, even when our enemies fall, al tismach, you shouldn't rejoice. And how do we overcome these types of feelings? So one questioner puts it this way: I'm very embarrassed by a certain disgusting personality trait. I find myself pleased when I hear about another person's hardship or failure. For some reason, when I hear about someone winning or succeeding, I have a certain inner resentment for no reason at all. And the opposite is true. I like to hear about people's misfortunes and challenges. I looked it up in English, and this condition actually has a name, schadenfreude. In Yiddish, it's nicht farginen. It's hard to explain. It's a bit sadistic. I also know I'm not the only one who has this issue. Do you have any advice for countering this midah? And it's one of those unspoken midahs. People don't talk about it much because it is really completely irrational. And yet, you see it exists. So if no one out there has this issue, God bless you, thank God. But in case there is one person out there that may have it, let's address this issue, as this questioner writes. Psychologically, to analyze this, the most obvious, usual suspect for any type of feeling like this is insecurity. When you feel that you're not successful, you're a failure, you feel that you're a loser, you feel in any way inadequate, the easiest way to numb your own pain is by saying everyone else is losing. So when you see someone succeed, it just accentuates and amplifies your own inadequacy. So this would be the most basic reason why we would have that feeling. If everybody else is also mediocre, I don't stand out that much. I'm not that bad. Whereas if you see people successful, truly successful, it just shines a light, the glaring light, where you stand. That doesn't make the midah more pleasant, it just analyzes it a bit. So the real issue here is identity crisis and self-confidence. And people who are very comfortable within their own skin will have definitely less issues with schadenfreude and with Nisht farginen, because they will celebrate someone else's simcha. There's a competitiveness sometimes as well, but a competitive doesn't have to get to the point that you resent someone else's success. Competitiveness means, I wish I could do it, but we're talking here a situation where you don't gain anything. So how does one counter this? If this is indeed the case, the way to counter it is, besides trying to fight this bad midah, which is often difficult to do, it's to bring into your life something that makes you feel good about yourself. If you feel successful, and you feel motivated and feel that you've achieved something with whatever effort you've invested, that is the easiest way to somewhat subdue the feelings of resentment about other successes. Obviously, it's a longer, the derech harucha k'tzad, it's a long, short road. It's much easier that no one else succeeds, like misery loves company. However, the real healthy way and the Chassidic way is to do it this way. Now, the mere feeling itself is something to think about, just like Avos Yisrael is not an easy mitzvah to fulfill. The same thing is here. Someone succeeds. If you felt it was your own flesh and blood, it was an extension of you, if it was your own brother and sister, okay, there can also be some jealousies and envy, that's true. But if it was something that was a part of who you are, then it should be your celebration. We're succeeding together. We're all in it together. That's the second point to be made on this topic. And finally, in dealing with such feelings, like Chassidus in general says, how do we counter them, besides everything I've said till now, is to channel it into other directions. You feel someone else is being successful, so maybe that should motivate you. Kinas sofrim tar b'chachma, which means healthy envy increases wisdom. Why? Because it motivates you. Just like we talk about the contest. There's a certain thing about competition that is not always comfortable. I remember as a child, I never liked musical chair game, because I always felt that the kids that were left out, they were slower, didn't make a chair, felt really bad for them. And as you know, when there's a winner, you always feel, what about the people who are not winning? What does it do to them? But at the same time, there is a concept of kinas sofrim tar b'chachma. It's healthy to build up that strength to sometimes know you haven't won, someone else has won, and celebrate with them. That's a midah. That's a midah teva, to be able to get beyond your sore losing tendency or other type of resentment, to celebrate with them, and then let it motivate you to be a lot better, work harder, and be better. Instead of arguing and trying to make someone else wrong, why don't you try to be more right? Why do you have to bring them down? Bring yourself up. That's the key. Okay, let's move to another midah, not such beautiful midah, the issue of lying and duplicity. I'm a liar. I find myself compulsively avoiding the truth, telling white lies, or simply giving misinformation about what I'm doing, my whereabouts and activities. Does Chassidus give any suggestions about how to stop? There's actually, I just recently saw a Rishima from the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's printed in the back of Sefer Mamorim Tovshin Yud Aleph. I don't have it here with me. I'll give you the page number next time. But there's a story he tells there about a person who had issues with lying. Actually, the story there is a pretty harsh story, but I'll just briefly share it with you. That he was told by one of the tzaddikim that he should control himself from lying. If not, he will be struck with a way that he won't be able to lie again, which is with a certain muteness. And that's actually what happens. Now, reading it, it was of course not a Chassidish, seemingly not a Chassidish approach. Usually we don't hear about people being punished or about people being muted as a result. But I was thinking about it, what the deeper meaning of Chassidus is in this story, and it's very clear what it means. It wasn't about, God forbid, punishing someone. We'll hopefully talk about reward and punishment. It's cause and effect. When a person lies, they're using the koyach hadibur, the power of speech that God blessed them with. And they're using it to abuse that blessing, that gift. So in a really emes-dika world, what do you think, an elam emes, where everything is truth, and everything is about the seamlessness and lack of duplicity, there would be no tolerance for a lie. If someone tried to lie, they wouldn't be able to speak. So it's not about a punishment. It's not about getting even with someone. It's just reality. Some people, in that case, like it says about Rav Nachum Shanobler, akum cholav shechol v'boy akum ein yisrael re'eyu, which means milk that was prepared by a person who shouldn't prepare the milk for a Jew, a non-Jew. He didn't see. As the story goes, well, there's Shabbos with the light, that someone lit a light in the wrong way. He didn't see there was light, and he felt it was dark. Same thing with the cholav, he didn't see it. Why? Because a person who's refined through and through does not see something that is not there. That is not appropriate, I should say. Sometimes the Rebbe would say to people, he would say, they said something. He would say, We all knew, Chassidim knew. When the Rebbe says, it's not because he didn't hear it, because he heard something he didn't want to hear. So there's the concept of understanding that when given speech and given other things, and Ageres HaTshuva, the Alter Rebbe says, why there's no Kodesh today, at age 60, is because we're fargrepte Welt. Since the world is so coarse, It's not aligned. And that's why there's no direct, immediate impact of our negative experiences, negative iniquities on our behavior. Now you could say it's a blessing. Yes, it's a blessing in disguise in a certain way. But remember that when you don't see the consequence, let's say imagine somebody cuts themselves in a very deep way, or there's internal bleeding, and you feel everything is fine. That's not a blessing. That's just an inevitability, and you'd rather know these things are not fine. So the story is teaching us something, not that God forbid that should happen to anyone, to know to be very careful with everything that we utter out of our mouths. As the Sifsei Kayin, Shachal Atera says, the Chassidus brings it on the Pasha Sheftim V'Sheitim Titin L'cha B'chol She'erecha, that you shall appoint judges and law enforcers all your gates. What's She'erecha? So the Sifsei Kayin, cited in Chassidus, says, the Rebbe brings in various sikhs, that there's 7 gates we have. We have a mouth, we have 2 nostrils, we have 2 ears, we have 2 eyes. That's 7 gates. And you have to be careful and set judges and law enforcers to make sure to know what enters those gates and what leaves those gates. Meaning what you see, to be careful what you allow yourself to see, what you allow yourself to hear, what you allow yourself to smell. And then, of course, what you allow into your mouth, and also what you release out, your words. Now, it's not easy, but that's the way when you become conscientious and sensitive to your words and recognize that the words you say are part of your contribution to this world, it becomes a little more easier to be sensitive to the fact that one should be extremely careful in this type of lying. Now, of course, there are deeper reasons people lie. Again, it goes back to insecurities, fears, or they learned from people around them to lie. They saw lying as being an easy way out of a situation. So there's a lot more to say about it. I just wanted to share that thought about speech. And I believe I have talked about this in a previous episode. Again, I don't know the number of the episode, but I will refer to it when I look it up. And one final thing I want to say about this is about emes in general. Emes is one of the greatest gifts a person could have. A type of the peacefulness that comes from, and seamlessness that comes from what you see is what you get. Not echad b'peh, echad b'lev, which means a duplicity, where you say one thing and you feel another. Everyone understands that it's a healthier approach to have a life where you can feel that way. Some of us have developed cynicism and been jaded, have lost trust, so we don't feel we can always express ourselves because we've either been hurt or we'll be judged. So we baputs. You adorn your words, and then you amplify them, and you want to make things look better, or you minimize other things, and we slowly develop another language. The ability to be emes means the ability to be in touch with your inner self and be able to express that. Does that mean we can do it 24/7? No, but try an exercise. Instead of just fighting the lying tendency, try to say some true things today. So fine, let's leave the lies aside. Bring some truth into the picture. As you begin to say things that are truthful, what do I mean by that? Not just truthful, heartfelt, something sincere, something coming from your heart to another person. You start having in your life another contrast, and that automatically will help you weaken the strength, the temptation to say a lie, because you'll have the contrast. If you don't have that light, then all you have left is the only resource and tool you have is lying. So that's yet another suggestion in this area. Okay, let's move on now to some parenting issues, in following up some of the previous programs. So parenting issues. Tough love. A child is like a warm ball of wax. Every imprint on that wax has an effect forever. Our childhood experiences inevitably mold us into who we become as adults. This is a mashal, an example the Rebbe gives in different letters and places. Is there anything we can do to overcome obstacles from our youth and negative experiences? Meaning that our wax has already been molded and now is hardened. What if we do not want to emulate the environments we were exposed to? Is there a way to break free, remove these impressions, and change? Can we develop self-esteem, unconditional love, and acceptance of self later in life, even if we were deprived of them in childhood? One questioner writes, I grew up in a home of tough love and few words. No, my parents were not abusive, but by any means, just as survivors of Stalin and Hitler, just by any means. Just as they were survivors of Stalin and Hitler, life was so short with much to make up for. For example, we were constantly challenged and made to feel they were never really lived up to expectations. Now, with growing children of my own, I wonder if self-esteem can be passed on to my children. A related question, how can someone who has been badly abused succeed to reach the true humility of her soul, beyond the precarious and defensive ego he has built for him or herself to survive? Okay. So this is a not easy question to answer, especially in generic terms. However, I'll do my best. And at the end of the day, we all have to remember the most important thing. And this is really where Chassidic psychology is far superior to any other school of thought. It comes down to who are we and what makes us tick. If we are indeed the id, in the words, driven by the id in the words of Freud, survival of the fittest in the words of Darwin, and that we are essentially animal, selfish, narcissistic creatures that are in just for our own self-indulgence and survival, and that's who we are at the core. So you can imagine, as much as we will acquire and superimpose type of disciplines and controls, ultimately we're made of raw, brute matter. However, if we are, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Perek Beis, every Jew, a chelik elekam emal mamash, a piece of God, however you explain it, created in the divine image, in the words of the Chumash itself, then that's who you are at the core. Then it's a whole different approach. So psychology, which is the study of the soul, all comes down to what is our soul like. Some people feel the dominant feature of a human being is Yetzer Lev Ha'adam Ra Min Urav, which means that the inclination of a person is evil from childhood. This is a pasuk in Parsha Neach, but they neglect to remember Parsha Neach is the second Parsha in the Torah. That's where the Yetzer Hara is born, or at least not born. It was created in the first Parsha, but the first time it's described. The Yetzer Tov, or we should say the creation of the human being in the Tzelem Elokim, that's the first description of the human being. That's who we are. Then there's a Yetzer Hara which manifests in the Nachash HaKadmeni, the serpent that seduced and convinced Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge. But that's who we are at the core, and that's the fundamental aspect to everything in life. With that attitude, with that confidence, then you're shooting for finding and discovering that inner treasure within each of us. Eretz Chayfetz, as the Baal Shem Tov says, filled with precious stones and emeralds and jewels. So when you think of that, of us, each of us that way, that means we're born that way. And then no matter what happens in your life, the tough love, the abuse, the difficulties. So it's true, they make impressions in the warm ball of wax. And they become hardened into our personalities. But not all is ever lost, because the soul never loses its identity. And no matter who we are, we say Neshomish and Nesatabi is what? Tahirihi, is pure. Even though it goes through Ata Barasa, you created it, Ata Yitzata, you shaped it, Ata Nefachta Bi, you've imbued it and instilled it within me, Va'ata Meshamer B'Kibim, you protected in this difficult life. But it's still rooted in Tahira, in the world of Atzilus, as Chassidus explains. All the way up to Tahira Ilah, the highest levels before the Tzimtzum. So we're talking about, that's the essence of who we are. That doesn't mean that layers and deposits and veils and shrouds and everything we become trapped in are not affecting us. So the challenge is, how do we warm the wax again to reveal the Yechidah Shebenefesh, the essence of the person who we are? That's the most important thing to tell every child, every adult, every one of us. If you've grown through difficulties, never ever forget that. And you need friends and people to support and reinforce again and again and again. You may need to be reminded 1,000 times a day. That's who you are at your core, and never ever forget that. Because that's your salvation. That's the lifeline. You stop ceasing to connect to that pure part of yourself, then of course you'll become victim of circumstances, and you'll succumb to all the forces of nature and the elements that have shaped and defined your piece of wax. So the key is to get back to that point, and that's why we do it through learning Torah, through doing mitzvahs, through amunah, betachin, faith and trust in God, connecting to that part of your soul and expressing it, living up to that part of your soul, even if you're not in the mood, All that creates a type of connection that can circumvent, or rather I should say counter, the forces that have shaped us. Is it an easy process? No. This is a long, sometimes long haul through our lives. It can be a lifetime journey, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, the battle of the Beinoni. We're all battling. The battles may take on one shape more subtle for some, and they take on a more harsher shape for others. So that is my general answer to the question. More details have to be addressed one-on-one, case by case, and how you, whoever you may be, your individual, can find the way to connect to that part of yourself. But remember, it's the immortal and eternal elements in our lives. The Torah we learn, the mitzvahs we do, the charity we give, the families and homes we build, the health that we bring into this world, the light that we shine to others, those are the forces that bring alive that part of your soul that may be dormant and may have gone undercover in this hardened ball of wax. But it's always there. The pilot flame is always burning. It needs to be fanned, and as it fans, it warms the wax again, and yes, you can change things. In addition, like the mile of a Baal Tshuva, the advantage of a Baal Tshuva, that which you've gone through that's a negative can be transformed to positive by using what you learn from it, the experience that you gain from it, to helping others in a similar situation. Follow up, another question in the same vein of family. Ben Seder Omer, are there any circumstances which warrant us giving up on our child? The Pasha Ben Seder Omer, which is talking about a Widerspänniger, as they said in Yiddish, a child that completely rebels against their parents, seems to suggest a hopeless child. Is that applicable? What is it teaching us about education of children? And the writer, one of the writers elaborates. I was studying the parsha of dear Rabbi Jacobson. I was studying the parsha of the Ben Seder Omer. I was getting so many confusing, mixed messages about it. On the one hand, it seems that the Torah is specifically teaching us that there's such a thing as a child that cannot and will not change for the better. It seems that the only way with such a child is to eliminate him. That's a strong word. Now that alone is already a very absurd message, and I'm really not sure how parents and educators would take that today. They may be using it in the wrong context, but after all, what is the correct message? On the other hand, I see that the Gemara explains that it's almost impossible to actually fulfill all the conditions that have to be met in order to carry out this ruling about such a child. Or let's be specific. The language is loy hoye v'loy nivra. That a Ben Seder Omer is a complete hypothetical. It didn't exist and never existed. Alter Rebbe explains in Kuntas Achron, what are these halachas, the leishchiach, halachas that never happened. What's the point of learning about them? And the spiritual messengers in them. I'm just adding to the writer. But that only adds to making it more difficult to understand, the writer continues. If the Torah didn't want it to happen, why did the Torah give this directive in the first place? So my answer is, look in Kuntas Achron there. The one message I thought maybe was clear was the fact that it seems that we are taught that the mother and father have to be on the same page in order for this child to be killed. It seems to be telling us that if the parents aren't in agreement about the education of the child, that can be a main cause of his difficulties, is therefore clearing him of his own responsibility, as may be when they work out their own issues out between each other, their child will be helped as well. Please help me understand what is that the Torah is teaching us about this and how it can be applied to education of our children. Are there any circumstances which warrant us giving up on our child? The Pasha Ben Seder Omer seems to suggest a hopeless child. Is that applicable? So that was more elaborated. Again, lo hayev le nivra means literally that never happened and never will happen. The reason we learn about it is, yes, because hypothetically it's important to know sometimes the worst case scenario, which teaches us things. How do you apply it to our lives? Well, there are many things that can be said. One point you make is a good point about how parents have to be on the same page, or else they can cause damage to a child. We're not getting now, the punishment of a child like that is not applicable because, as I said, there's no such thing as a child. Giving up on a child, absolutely not and never, period. There's no ifs or buts. Especially in our day and age, we see it in the Rebbe's letters time and again, there is absolutely no exception to that. I won't talk about previous generations because I believe then also was the case, even though there may have been some instances not giving up where there may have been harsher situations addressed in certain ways. But that's not today. Today, there's no such thing for many reasons. Above all, we live in a generation, Adoy Yosem, we're already Yosemim. We're already orphaned spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. We don't need to orphan our children further by taking away the last vestige of hope, which is their parents and family. So yes, if a child is in difficult situations, we can learn from Ben Seder and Meida where a person can fall. But at the end of the day, the approach has to be one with love and kindness. What about discipline? Discipline is a part of life, but discipline is always part of chesed, a part of kindness and love. So I would just say is that when you learn about this, you learn about the horrors that are possible. And unfortunately, even though we don't have a technical Ben Seder and Meida, many of us today, ein bayis b'lei mes, you find families that have difficulties with children, with great aggravation, and want to love, and they love their children and continue to love them, but find it very difficult and challenging. So maybe the Ben Seder and Meida gives us a certain measure, not of hope, but a certain measure of understanding that things could be worse. More importantly, that even then the Torah addresses it. But the way we address it is not through, God forbid, doing what it says, the negative things, but on the contrary, finding ways to dig deeper. Like I said, the soul is always pure, especially our own charged soul. And we have to find ways to re-access it, to revisit it, to regain, to reconnect with it, and fan those flames of the pilot flame that always remains alive in every child. If anybody has any thoughts on these ideas, I'll be happy to hear them and perhaps read them. And here's also an opportunity to submit your anonymous questions or comments or additions at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. Okay. Helping or destroying my child. Should I share with my teenage son information about his personality and how others view him in order to help him grow and refine himself? Or will this type of feedback be destructive, especially since he is very defensive? And more elaborate, dear Rabbi Jacobson, I went to someone to discuss my son's situation in school, which has become very difficult. And he really gave me a fascinating understanding of my son's difficult personality, which really opened new gates of understanding for me. I was just wondering if sharing this information with my son, who is 15 years old and quite mature, would be helpful or harmful. I asked the person I went to for guidance this question, and he told me that he cannot give me a straight answer to that question. On the one hand, I feel that having him be more open to his own tendencies, something it seems that he is totally unaware of, will help him see things from the outside and see things with other people see them as other people see them in him. But on the other hand, knowing how defensive he gets when anything is pointed out to him, I'm worried that it may just make things worse. I said we would not want to use the information the wrong way and go ahead and justify any amount of negative behavior by the fact that this is who he is naturally. Maybe it boils down to the old question of how much a person is really affected by his personality and how hard it is for him to overcome. You mentioned something about this last week, and I wanted to know your take on this issue. I'll be quite honest with you, I have the same exact issue with my wife, and although she is older and more mature than my son, and does understand my son's situation quite well from her own perspective, I wonder how expressing the same idea to her about her own nature will help her overcome her challenges. Okay. For some reason, I always get this knee-jerk reaction, and I will express it before I answer the question, or maybe this is part of the answer to the question. Because I don't know who's writing this, and I don't know whether he, it's clearly a he because he says wife, has issues himself, it's difficult to answer this question in a complete fashion. Because reading a note like this, and with some of the experience I have, it could also very well be that the person writing it is somewhat of a control freak, or has other issues, trying to impose them on his family. I'm not suggesting that it's an accurate depiction of the son or the daughter or the wife, but I'm trying to suggest is how are you dealing with it and how are you bothered by it? Maybe there's some things that you have to overlook. Who says you have to control it all? Maybe people have different ways of looking at it. So without knowing the people involved here and hearing all sides of the story, it's very hard to comment. And I think it's very critical to mention this, because many questions people have don't take into account this factor, that you who's asking the question are also a factor. And this is not meant to be critical. I'm not trying to dismiss the question. I'm trying to be honest. If you want to really be honest, the first place to be honest is not with your son or with your wife, is with yourself. What role do you play in this whole thing? Are you helping? Are you the critic? Do they see you as a positive force? Do they see you as someone that's just looking to criticize? To me, that's a critical component before answering the question. Because if they see you as a critic and someone that thinks you have it all figured out and they're always the problem, guarantee you that nothing you'll say will help. Then the question is moot. You ask the question, should I tell my son what I heard in school? This revelation that you heard also smacks to me somewhat almost like, I wouldn't say glee, but you're saying, I went to school with my son, and he really gave me a fascinating understanding of my son's difficult personality. Like, I don't like to make a conclusion that someone has a fascinating discovery of someone's difficult personality. He's your son, and what does that mean? He was born this way? Is it something he acquired? Is it something he picked up from you? And again, I mean to say this all with all sensitivity, but if we're going to talk bluntly, let's talk bluntly. So I would need to know more about what exactly is this difficult personality, what was this fascinating understanding, and why did you want to share it? And if you did share it, what impact it would have on your child? Not because whether the child is defensive or not, but whether you are the person to share it. Will you be trusted? Will it be said in a way that the child, the 15-year-old, will relate to it? You said 15 years old, right. And same thing with your wife. Since you already brought your wife, and that's what alerted me, and the red flag went up that you seem to have this issue not just with your son, also with your wife. So I wonder what they would think about you. Now, with that being said, let's assume that the intentions are all pure, and you are good at saying it, then it does come down to sensitivity. If you are so loving and kind and seen as such, then sit down with your child. You don't have to say, I heard this in school about you. Obviously, that's not a good way to do it. You could just talk. Now that you have this information, in a very subtle and sensitive way, you can broach. Many things don't have to be said. They just have to, you know it, so you have to figure out how to best approach it. The overall objective has to be making things better. Not to point fingers and say, now I know why you're this way. Do this, do that, take this medication, go to this doctor. Now I know why you're disrespectful to me or chutzpahdik because you have this issue, that issue. That type of approach never works. Kindness, love, genuine sincerity, and now that you know some information, maybe that can be helped. Instead of putting in the context of this stark approach, should I tell him about his faults or should I not? Now, the reason I'm reacting this way is simply based on my instinct reading this. I may be completely wrong, but I know in other situations I'm not wrong about this type of approach. Overall, I think I covered all the gamut of different options in this situation. There are a few more follow-up questions that I will leave for next week that are good ones, but I'll go to the Chassidus question of the week and then the essays. Okay. In chapter 6 of Tanya, in chapter 6, Tanya introduces the 10 faculties of the Nefesh Habamis, the animal soul, that are parallel to the 10 faculties of the Nefesh Elikiz, the divine soul. As he says there, Zelu Umazeh, Asa Lakim, a type of alter ego, parallel worlds, if you wish, parallel world, parallel personalities, Lum Yamot, like twins. So you have 10 faculties of Nefesh Elikiz that were addressed earlier. Interestingly, the Tanya began first with Nefesh Habamis, chapter 1, moved to the Nefesh Elikiz for 5 chapters, actually for 4 chapters, and then chapter 6 goes back to the 10 faculties of the Nefesh Elikiz. Zelu Mazeh, you also have 10 faculties of the Nefesh Habamis. That's what the writer is introducing. Okay, chapter 6 introduces that in Tanya. I have several questions about this. Why are they called crowns of impurity? As Alter Rebbe says, they're called kisrin de misavusa. A few lines into the chapter. Crowns of impurity. Number 2, what is the difference between the Chochmah, Bina, and Das of the Nefesh Elikiz and those of the Nefesh Habamis? Being that the Alter Rebbe says that 10 faculties, it's not just emotions, emotional attributes, but also the mind. So what's the difference between the Chabad, the mind, the intellectual faculties of the divine soul and of the animal soul? We can understand the difference between the midas, emotions of the two souls. One is emotionally drawn to godliness and holiness, and the other to self-interest and self-preservation, which is why the 7 midas are called doubles, as cited earlier in chapter 3. I'll get back to that. So what is the difference between the intellectual aspect, not the midas, emotional aspect? But what is the essential distinction between a spark of the intellect from the divine soul's intellect and that of the animal soul's intellect? And what would be an Even HaBeichen, a litmus test, to know how to distinguish between them, between the mind of the animal soul and the mind of the divine soul? So let's begin with a few points here. Firstly, let's start with Kissin de Misavusa. The reason that they're called Kissin de Misavusa, Chassidus explains, This is Teira Er Teildis. I'll give you the exact page in a moment. I'm looking it up. Yeah, Teira Er Teildis, the Bir Maskal, the Eireich Bonai. Reireich B'ni. There he explains, as well as in, let's see here, in the Maimer Yofa Sha'achas Tafresh Peivav from the Friedrich Rebbe, page 184, and other places, including Ayin Beis, that Kissen, the Mesavusa, Kissen means a Keser. Keser means Makif. It doesn't enter the Pnimius, because the spheres in Gedusha are Pnimius. The Eir and Keli are seamless and connected with each other. Whereas the energy, the divine energy that feeds the impure and negative faculties is like a keser that hovers above and doesn't enter internally. If you look at the end of chapter 11 in Tanya, where he speaks about the Rosh V'Rale, he speaks about also that he says Shinta Sharia B'Neim, even as sort of people, a sort of 10 Jews together. Shinta Sharia means because it's not within, it's makif above and doesn't enter. So that's the technical reason for the word keser. Sometimes it's explained keser also has a certain intensity, because keser is not tempered. So keser is connected to the ksarim of toihu. Everything there is like ksarim. Why? Because they're still immature, and the sense of their intensity, they haven't yet been seasoned and tempered as it is in the world of tikkun. So that's another expression of misavusa, of klipa, of the negative side, is very intense in its passion. Like, for example, situations where you have machlekes and so on, because there can be tolerance and coexistence. So that answers that question. As far as the difference between the midas and the meichen, interestingly, is a few points. First of all, let's go back to chapter 3, Taka. What does he say in chapter 3 in Tanya? So he says, he begins there with the 10 keiches. He says there's shalish imes and sheva kfules, which is an expression from the Sefer Yetzirah, referring also to the letters. The shalish imes, of course, is like the three mothers, referring to the sources, chachma, bina, das, which give birth to the sheva kfules, which is the sheva 7 midas, as he speaks there, seichel and midas. So what are the sheva midas, imes and kfules? So he's talking about also the letters of the alphabet. In the Hebrew alphabet, the letters Aleph, Mem, Shin are called Shalish Imes. Sefer Yetzirah. Let me see if I have the page here. I don't have the exact page, but he says there in the beginning there, Shalish Ames, B'Shevak Fuls, V'Yud Beis Pshutis. So what you have here is the 22 letters of the alphabet divided to the three, you can call them the three core letters of all other letters. That's Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Then there's the 7 kfules, which are broken into, kfules is like a doubles, because they can be expressed in two ways, dogish and rafa, which is either what we call hard or soft expression, like the beis that has a pintala in it is a beis, without the pintala in it, it's a vase. And these are 7 letters that Rosh Hashanah is Beged, Kapeh is Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Chof, Pei, Reish, and Tov. And the rest of the 12 letters, that's 10, and the other 12 letters of the 22 letters are called pshutis. They're simple letters. They're just an extension of the other letters. That's the technical element to this. So the writer is referring to the midas being kfulis. Now, one of the reasons why it's kfulis, the Alter Friedrich Rebbe says in the Maimer in Tavshin Gimel, the Maimer is the Maimer Yud Beis Tammuz Tavshin Gimel Elikim Keliata. Yud Beis Tammuz Tavshin Gimel on page 181, and there it seems to imply that the kfulis refers to what he says, Dogish V'Rafi, he writes, is Tavnis Rach v'Tavnis Kosher. It either has a soft and gentle structure or a harsh structure. And he says and suggests these are the two midas of Nefesh HaLekis are refined, as he explains there at length. It's chapter 3 in that Maimer. And then chapter 4 is the refined. And then he talks about the harsh element, which is in the negative midas, which are a lot harsher, kosher, in chapter 4. So, midas is correct. You see a difference, especially when you go to Perek Test, chapter 9 in Tanya. He says the seichel of the nefesh, the nefesh l'kis resides in the mind, and the nefesh habamis resides in the heart. What is the difference? The mind is reflective, and the heart is impulsive. The nefesh habamis is characterized by its impulses. And that's where we'll also get to the difference between the mind, between nefesh l'kis and nefesh habamis in a moment. But let's first talk about the emotions. So the emotions, but if the nefesh is the divine soul resides in the mind, what about its emotions? We know the divine soul doesn't just include 3 faculties, the intellectual ones, also 7 emotional ones. So the 7 emotional ones are guided by the reflective mind. The ava v'yira and all the other midas, love and awe and all the other emotional attributes are guided by the reflective and sensitive mind that turn them into rach, which is gentle midas, beautiful attributes. Whereas with the animal soul, the heart is what drives everything, impulse, not the mind. And that's why the order in Perek Vav, if you look in Perek Vav, he speaks, it's klul taka eser keichus, so he says there the 7 midas, and then he says the seichel hamelidon, and the mind that gives birth to them. Hanechlik l'shleisha, which divides into chachma bina das. So Rab Levi and Lekut Levi Yitzchak on this Tanya says why? Because the nefesh habamis, everything begins with the midas, the impulses. And this will explain the difference in the mind. So the mind of the animal soul is interested in one thing. Think of an animal. We know what animals call it. It has seichel hanikna. Does an animal not have mind? We see animals that are brilliant in their hunting abilities, in their breeding abilities, in survival and so on. But the mind is called a seichel hanikna. It means the seichel is essentially does not conceive of ideas. It's not imagination, and is not creative in the sense of transcending its own self. It's a seichel hanikna. It's built in. It's like a program that's built into a clock. A clock could also be intelligent. A machine can be intelligent. So animals have a seichel hanikna, but the seichel is completely subjugated to learning how to survive. The seichel of an animal is not subjugated to understanding the divine, to building a better life for itself, to discovering transcendence. It's all about how to hunt best, how to survive best. So the same thing with the animal soul. The midas is what drives, and the seichel that gives birth to it is that the midas then use the mind to figure out, how do I fulfill this taiva? How do I fulfill this thing that seduces me? How do I live up to this temptation? How do I how do I satisfy my needs and desires that are driven by the impulses of the emotional heart? So therefore the mind of the nefesh habamis is focusing on helping the nefesh habamis be a behemoth, basically, to live up to its own needs for survival, self-interest. The mind of the nefesh halakis is interested in teaching it about the divine, which gives birth to emotions that are guided and tempered by the mind and defined by the mind. So basically, both minds are at work, but they're very, very different. Chassidus also explains that the mind of a nefesh habamis is about the yesh. It's understanding things that make me feel greater. When people say, I understand something, and they feel their ego grows from it. Chochma of Gedusha, on the other hand, Chabad of Gedusha, brings humility. Because it's not about me understanding, it's about the truth being der hert, the truth being heard and sensed and resonating within us. So that answers, I believe, the questions that were asked. Let us now go over to the MyLife essays. 3 essays as we've been doing. This again, essays from last year's contest, which we continue doing. And hopefully continue on until we go to the new contest. First one is called Prozac Nation by Dvorah Leah Bogart, age 28, Yale University, MSN candidate, New Haven, Connecticut. Prozac Nation, fast food society, binge eating, drinking, stuff. We are empty. We seek substances to help us feel full. We fill our stomachs to cover our emotions so we don't have to feel our pain. And a whole beautiful introduction, beautiful, I would say, a great description, poignant description of modern times. How do we reconcile our drive to be spiritual with our constant, sometimes torturous temptations and desires? The key that Chassidus gives us is that desire is power. We must switch our mindsets and stop thinking of our desire as our trap or our downfall. Rather than repress our desires, we can harness their power and desire those things in our lives that connect us to spirituality. Sounds simple, but chocolate tastes better than hard work. Ice cream cones are more soothing than acts of goodness and kindness. This is what we think, but Chassidus and personal experience proves otherwise. And the essay goes on to explain how does Chassidus view the concept of desire, what is the practical method toward applying this perspective to our lives. And essentially speaking about the animal soul not being bad, as we discussed earlier, as opposed to the Yetzer Hara, but it's actually a form of energy, and it's neutral, and it can be channeled toward more elevated pursuits. And she goes on in this essay describing about the indulgence of in materialism and how it condemns us to feel guilty, and how we can transform that into a positive the power of desire coming from the essence of godliness, and then taking responsibility for our drives and not just them controlling us and harnessing them. So a very well-written essay. This discusses basically how we curb these temptations according to Chassidus, and understand that temptation comes from emptiness, and the goal is to fill that void. The marketing message in this society will change. Instead of buying into what substances can do for us, we will recognize that we can do for the substance, what we can do for the substances we buy. Yes. So this essay, as other essays, can be seen if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, as well as going to meaningfullife.com/essays. The next essay is Unconditional Unity by Hinda Bluma Scheinberger, student of the Rohr-based Chaya Academy at Coral Springs, Florida. Imagine you are sitting at work and suddenly your coworker sits right next to you, the person who makes you grit your teeth and seethe inside. Not the person you have hold a grudge against, but the one whose flaws and negative traits glaringly stand out to you. Basically, how do you get to the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself when you're dealing with people that seem to grate on your nerves? And seems like an impossibility, but then citing both Tanya chapter 32 and Derech Mitzvah, the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, this essay continues in explaining how we can get to that place and really to a place where spirit dominates over matter, and spells it out in practical terms in dealing with people that, as I said, make you nervous or agitate you in daily life. Okay. And concluding, so the next time the coworker walks in, remind yourself that she is part of you. You are loving her the same as you love yourself because she is part of you. The same way you may not like the way your nose looks, and you're not going to just cut it off, you are not going to cut off your fellow Jews from yourself. When her traits grate on your nerves, you can cover the flaws with love, acceptance, and tolerance as you would do with yourself. Your day will be then a much more positive experience. And finally, the third essay is a Hebrew one, When to Address Personal Shortcomings, by Ronit Leah Studnitz, age 34, Shlucha, Yerushalayim, Israel. Eis l'smoyach ve'eis l'shkoyach. Time to rejoice, a time to forget. Basically, it begins with interesting case studies of people who have very low self-esteem. And then, in a story-like narrative, weaves in how these people are introduced to different concepts in Tanya, including chapter 26, about having a positive attitude about things, including a letter from the Rebbe in Igros Kodesh about how any negative thoughts are coming from the negative side, and a few other sources, and describing how these pieces of Chassidus could teach you to, number one, focus on the positive, number two, not to say to yourself, I don't have time to indulge and wallow in my misery or negative feelings, and how that ultimately brings the positive energy in a person's life. So that's essay number 3, and with that, we conclude MyLife Chassidus Applied episode 103. Every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Please submit your questions, comments, anything you'd like to submit anonymously if you wish at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. You can also you can also add your email address if you want a specific answer to you. In addition, let me reiterate and encourage the contest that's still going on for another 10 days. Plenty of time to submit your essay for winning the $10,000 first prize, $3,600 second prize, $1,000 third prize. As I said before, everyone is a winner in the process of your futsa meinesacha chutza, taking an idea in Chassidus, applying it to a contemporary life challenge. May you all be matzliach in that. May we be zeichet to what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, kishir futsa meinesacha chutza, osimar do malka Mashiach. Thank you very much, and until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied.